Well, thank you all for coming and choosing to spend the next 40 minutes with all of us here. My name's Bella Bonner. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the founder and executive director for Black Surf Santa Cruz. And our workshop today is titled From Seed to Scale. So we're going to talk a little bit more about my experience as a leader, coming from recruiting in tech at a very high growth, high scale organization, to pivoting to starting Black Surf Santa Cruz with no surf experience, no nonprofit experience, and being able to grow out and scale out some of our programs and operations. So before we get started, I really kind of want to get an idea of where people are at in the room. So curious, how many of you are business owners? Hopefully everyone. How many of you have scaled and grown your business? How many of you are looking to grow and scale your business? And can I just get an idea of like what industries y'all are in? You could just kind of shout them out. Housing? Media? Sign making?
Travel.
Perfect. So the goal and hope of this session is for it to be very interactive. You can raise your hands and ask questions. Really, you all have your own experiences too that we can feed off and share with each other. And so your question might be someone else's question, or your experience might be another's. And so just want to make sure everyone in the room knows that your feedback is just as valuable as my own. But just to get started, I'd love to tell you a little bit about me. I grew up in Santa Cruz and got my associate's degree in sociology and my Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, Human Resource Management from San Jose State. So when I zoom back and look at my education and my career backgrounds and how I ended up where I am now, it all makes sense. But in the moments, everything felt very isolated and separate. So excited to kind of share how Black Surf Santa Cruz has been able to merge my background and also emerge some things for me as well. So in 2020, I actually got on a surfboard and put on a wetsuit for the first time. I had lived in Santa Cruz for about 15 years at this point, originally from the Bay Area, and moved here in middle school. And what I saw and what was planted in me was a seed for a vision and an idea. I didn't know what that would look like or what that would emerge into, but it really started with an idea that was planted in me. So the workshop today is going to be talking about how we took that idea and grew it into an organization now with 2.5 staff, over 15 volunteer surf instructors, and over 400 members who have signed up to receive our services over the last few years. We're going to talk about the different types of scaling, what that might mean to each of you individually as business owners or idea generators. So systems, how we can actually get some tangible resources to take your idea to the next level. How's that sound for everyone? Any questions before I get started? Great. Cool. So really, my background in recruiting, taking my experience from a large tech company, we actually were in the process of switching from a mid-size, which is right around 900 employees, to merging with an organization that had over 10,000 employees. So being able to merge the different company cultures, one was Silicon Valley based, which we all know tech is kind of hubbed here, and the other was a legacy org based out of the UK. Headquartered in Atlanta here in the United States. So definitely huge cultural differences and values and missions that needed to be merged and aligned and needed to be audited. So the company I worked at was called Sage Intact. We were very high growth, very innovative. And what that organization did really, really well is it had very clear values. From the jump, as a recruiter, that made my job very easy to be able to weed folks in and out. Purely based on values alignment, those soft skills to start. And then Sage, the larger organization, they were very values-based too, but as you can imagine, there were cultural differences being an international company versus a startup that had started based out of the Silicon Valley. So very quickly, we as a smaller team, our Intact team, needed to pivot quickly and figure out like what are the new values that we're communicating to potential candidates, what are the values that we're communicating to our current employees, and how do we merge the two and kind of shake things out so that we can merge as two organizations and grow. And then from the Black Surf side, that was really going from like 0 to 1, 1 to 2. And so my experiences has kind of blended those two things together. But I really want to start by addressing like, what is scale? Does anyone here have an idea? What's the difference between scaling and growth?
Systems.
Mm-hmm. That's something that's needed. What else?
Replication.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, yep, go for it. Shout it out.
For me, it's sustainability.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So to me, yes, I agree. The difference between scaling and growth is I personally see growth as a 1-for-1. So your income and expenses are kind of increasing at the same time. Whereas scaling to me is more of like a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1, where you're able to increase your impact, increase whatever metric it is you're trying to grow at a rate that's not rapidly increasing your expenses. So you are able to just see, I kind of view it as exponential growth. And growth can happen year over year, but to me, scaling usually happens within a concerted period of time. Like, we are gonna go really hard in the next 6 to 12 months to, for me, when I was at the Intac side, I went from like 5 hiring managers to having 13 hiring managers I was responsible for, and like 12 job recs that I had open to over 30. And so that was scale because my role didn't change, but the impact of what I was doing did. And the investments from the larger organization also shifted as well. Another thing I really want to speak to as small business owners and just business owners and founders in general is like, how do we take that to the next level? What systems and processes are needed? So I'm going to spend a little time talking about how we did it at Black Surf, and then we're all going to be able to interact and engage and decide, like, what does scaling mean for you and your business? Does it mean more time? Does it mean you want more locations? Are you trying to scale revenue? Are you trying to scale your operations? We'll kind of be able to get into the nitty-gritty, and you can ask any questions that you have. But one thing that all businesses need in order to scale is very clear mission, vision, and values. So to me, that is your starting point. Having so much clarity around your why and why that seed was planted in your heart for a reason, and being able to communicate that externally. So having values and a mission is a system that can be replicated. And so with Black Surf Santa Cruz, we started in 2020, and for the first 2 years, I was still working as a recruiter in tech, so it was very much a side hustle. It was just me. At first, it was like just my savings account, and then we grew to a GoFundMe, and then we grew to actually incorporating as a nonprofit in 2022, which meant all of a sudden that team of 1 that was just me went to now I have 11 board members. No cost investment, and so we were able to scale just people-wise who's involved, and then having those people allowed us to really like build the systems. So having the mission and vision called in the right organizers, called in the right bodies to help us move it along. And then they actually helped us start to come in and create processes around it. So in late winter 2021 is when I recruited my full board of directors. So I knew what skill sets I was needing. I knew what skill sets I was lacking. No nonprofit experience before this. Didn't know how to surf, so it was very much like, I'm gonna need some people to help me do this. So when I first recruited, we were very executive director heavy. A lot of other nonprofit leaders and industry people that could help teach me as a young emerging leader, show me the blueprint, show me like not reinvent the wheel. So a lot of them helped create our bylaws, our first budgets, going from my savings to GoFundMe to now co-creating a budget with 10 other bodies was different, and it was new, and it was like some of the first phases of us scaling out as an organization before we knew it, because we were now finally creating models, we were now documenting our processes, we were really able to kind of expand in that way. And then from there, you're able to see we hired our first staff person a year after, so the year that I feel like Black Surf really scaled, we've been in very high growth since the beginning of our organization, but really was that period from 21 to 2022, as we did incorporate as a nonprofit, as we did start to infuse systems, people power, and just like that documentation process was so huge for us as an organization. And so that kind of moved into that. And that's where we saw the biggest impact in just revenue-wise. We doubled our impact in programming. We were able to now support different programs. And so that was like huge program scaling, in my opinion. And then from there, we created a system to start to hire. So a lot of people, how many people in here are like wearing all of the hats in your organization? How many of you want to be doing that forever? Really? Yeah. I think one of the interesting things as founders and as leaders is when you hit that first wall, you are going to know when it's time to scale, and you're going to know when the capacity for yourself, you can't do it alone anymore, and that you need to ask for help. And if you want to grow your business, for me, my motto is like, I personally don't feel like I've created a sustainable organization until it can exist without me as the founder or as a leader. And so that's always my goal for growth. Like if I wasn't here tomorrow, how can Black Surf still exist? And how can it still have sustainable impact and still meet the mission? And so that's very much what we're kind of reverse engineering as a board of directors of how does this happen without you, without your idea and without your vision? And that comes from systems, that comes from people, and that of course comes from resources. Before I keep going, does anyone have any questions? I really want this to be interactive, so raise your hand whenever.
You had a really big group of directors come in or help
Yeah.
staff. Did you feel you needed that many, or was it just like the best hands on deck for what you were trying to do?
Kind of a combination of both. So one, I didn't know any better. I think our initial team of board of directors was very hands-on, and it was very like everyone was in the mud together. I do think some players were more of advisors than board members, not just in the nature. And so if I were to do it again, I probably would bring on more advisors and less like actual board, BOD members, yeah, at large. Great question. Any other questions?
How did you target them?
Great. So that was the one thing I was really excited about as a former recruiter. I was like, ooh, a hat I'm comfortable in and really know. I created kind of a matrix. So of course, first starting with my skill gaps, which was no surf experience, no nonprofit background, but when you kind of blend my education, that makes sense. And so I went after people that could help fill those gaps initially, and then also talk to other founder executive directors of like, how did you decide? So a lot of meetings of just pure, what would you not do again? Tell me your best secrets. And a lot of people were like, target someone in tech. So have someone in tech to kind of bridge that gap. Legal, a lot of folks will mention like having people in real estate. There's different industries kind of dependent on your organization and your industry that you can kind of play with to see what gaps you need. Human resources and all of that good stuff.
As you were scaling, what surprised you that you weren't expecting throughout this process?
How much leadership is just like your own personal development and like all of the things you're working through as an individual. I think a good one with this is as a nonprofit, I have to fundraise a lot. And when I first started, I had a really hard time asking for money. And so I had to do my own like money scarcity and abundance work, because otherwise our organization was gonna always be coming into things from a lack perspective. And so that really is always, it's just always the inner is the outer, I think it continues to surprise me, and you can always feel as you work through shifts, like things will open up in your business or organization. Any other questions?
You know, working with you, there's one thing about scaling that I think is the perfect time to talk about it is, this is kind of like the logistics of it, kind of like the scaling concept. But for us, when we work together, can you talk about scaling like culture and mission?
Scaling impact?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. That's what, and I'm gonna be so just like transparent with y'all. When I started to work on my workshop, I was like, oh shit, like has Black Surf really scaled in the way that I wanna see? And I think from a program perspective, from a budget perspective, and surely from an impact perspective, we absolutely have. And that's one of the biggest things as a nonprofit, which of course I'm gonna address, like for-profit and nonprofit are a little bit different, but we're both businesses. My goal is to have a huge impact, and to figure out different ways to be able to measure and quantify it in a way that aligns with our values as an organization. And so we as a board and as a team have a lot of conversations around like, what is our impact? Do we really want to say as a Black-led, Black-serving nonprofit that it's just the number of Black bodies in the ocean? Like, to me, that's not impact. It's like, how are we targeting people who have never had that experience? How are we targeting families who felt like that's never going to be for them? And so while, of course, like quantity is one of our metrics and funders love that kind of data, we are really more focused on like those qualitative data stories and like just the actual stories of impact. And so for me, a measure of like having people who grew up in Santa Cruz, were born, raised here, get in the ocean for the first time at our Liberation paddle out, like that's a number you can't, that's an impact you can't necessarily quantify, because now they might encourage their kids to get in the water. They might be able to pass down more generational comfort to someone. And so being able to kind of find like what is scaling impact and how do we as an org quantify and communicate that, because we really are trying to be like cutting edge and a little bit different in how we talk about like nonprofit philanthropy. And yeah, great question. Any other questions? Go for it.
To kind of bounce off of Brian's question, so when you're scaling impact and you know you're working so hard to scale, how are you blocking out? How are you staying so on message and on track with the mission and values while scaling that you're also able to block out those for whom your mission is not for?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think inherently our organization name is our first line of defense. So Black Surf Santa Cruz, it stands out. It kind of has like it hits. It doesn't as much now that people have heard it, but in the very beginning, I got a lot of pushback. I got a lot of feedback about that. But it was so clearly communicating who we were for and our why. And then kind of going from there, like I was taught in my career perspective to be very values aligned. And when I was working at Sage Intact, there was no fluff around that. It was just like, oh, you're not a values fit. But then when I turned to Black Surf Santa Cruz, all of a sudden it's you're excluding people and you're this and that. And it's like, how are those two things different? Like we have our target audience and our target population, and we're communicating clearly how we want to meet that and make that happen. And so our name was kind of our first line of defense, and then building values around that so that we could have infrastructure to protect me as the executive director in fielding some of those questions that really aren't from people who want to be a part of our organization in the first place, but are kind of just trying to fluff things up. And so that's been very helpful, is just like knowing our values and having a team that is able to stay hyper focused on our why has been huge. Good question. Any other questions?
Knowing that you're a nonprofit and you're trying to build with only a limited amount of capital, and
Yes.
obviously coming from a for-profit,
Mm-hmm.
how did you incentivize and bring on directors? Like what kind of incentivization did they request from you?
Yeah, well, thankfully, board of directors can't get paid. So that made it very just clear it's a volunteer role. And so that values alignment really attracted people. I also, to follow up on your question, went after local high school surf coaches just to like really help bridge us into that world. Director of Parks and Rec from Watsonville. And so I really was so niche in my list of people that I had. And if they told me no, I was like, okay, well then who? Like, who do you recommend that I go follow up with? And that was really helpful. I only had 1 or 2 board members that ended up on like a rollover of a no. But that was like, well, what do you think we're missing? Like just really kind of not putting it back on people, but valuing other people's experiences and expertise. Yeah, it helped that I knew what I didn't know, I think, because I think we kind of can move away from that as we get more ingrained and embedded in our roles sometimes. Like, we don't know it all, and how can we ask people to, like, give us more feedback, too? Did that answer your question?
Did you do the director, like, getting your team together first before looking for funding?
So, this is so interesting. Black Surf, I will say, we're sometimes a little bit of a unicorn in certain senses. So I have what I call my fairy grandparent. They're Justice Outside, and they actually funded me as a leader before we were a nonprofit, which is so rare. Normally funders, you have to have 501c3 status. And so we actually got granted a $20,000 grant before we were even a business or nonprofit, which sucked for my taxes, but it was like, yeah. Any other questions? Did that answer your question?
More so, like you said, you didn't have all the full skill set, right? Never
Yeah.
really been in the water or anything like that. So how do you get people to take you seriously if you don't necessarily have everything to make that happen?
I think what's like unique about Black Surf Santa Cruz is that my experience as a person who had lived here for so long and didn't have access to surfing, didn't have access to some of those experiences, my experience was scaled out in itself. So how our organization came to be was through a paddle out. It was actually after the murder of George Floyd, and the community was putting on a memorial paddle out for him. And unfortunately, the demographics just like weren't reflective of the communities that were really in mourning, which is the reality of Santa Cruz too. But I reached out to the organizer and I was just like, hey, like, what's your plan to ensure that like Black and BIPOC bodies can be a part of this event? And she was so sweet. She was like, I hadn't thought about that. So we worked together to put a call to action to the whole community of just like, hey, would any allies or people who have been able to do this so many times be willing to kind of sit this one out and open it up for people like me who haven't had that experience? And so I think uniquely, because our organization is quite literally cultivated and curated around people who don't have access like myself, like I'm a subject matter expert in not knowing. And so that makes it so like all of our programs were so beginner focused. It was so like grassroots, root-based level of like, what do you need to feel safe to do this? And for me personally, it was like, all right, I need a group of other people. I need to know I'm safe. I'm not gonna rent a wetsuit or a board. Like I'm not gonna spend money on it. So how can I create a program that models my experience and kind of builds it out? And so, yeah, I was an expert in like that not knowing, and it attracted a lot of people that did know. Our first program, the curriculum was developed by a former surf school instructor who just like, it's like, I loved that. Now I have a full-time job. Like, how can I help you get this off the ground? So it was, yeah, that values alignment of just like communicating what our needs were. Yeah, great question.
What's the breakdown of your funding sources?
Good question. Right now we're a little grant heavy, which given the current administration, I'm kind of actively trying to switch back to like individual donations. A lot of our Liberation Paddle Out serves as my biggest fundraiser of the year. And so corporate sponsorships, because all of our programs are free, I'm able to go to funders and get subsidization, like have them subsidize it in a way. And so, yeah, I would say individual donors right now, if I were to give you, I literally just did this. I think we're like 65% grants right now, which is pretty heavy.
Where do you want to be at? Private? Or?
I mean, I want to be able to have the ability to pivot as needed. So I think this new incoming administration and we're a diversity, equity, and inclusion-based organization. Our two biggest grants right now are like the county and Explore the Coast, which is California Coastal Conservancy. So that's state and county government funding. So, you know, there's nerves around that. I would love to switch to kind of being a little bit more grassroots again. Like we started off a GoFundMe, which was all individuals donating. And so being able to call more people in for that support during this time. But really the power is in just being able to pivot in the first place. So.
In terms of scaling, can you speak to like how you've like leaned on or like considered like community and like shaping like your offerings?
Yeah, I think when it comes to scaling too, how I mentioned, it's like a 2-for-1 ratio. As a nonprofit, we have a little bit of an advantage with volunteers and with people wanting to donate their time, wanting to get like an in-kind tax write-off. And so Black Surf Santa Cruz has kind of been this community love story in that like local surf shops have been like, we'll give this to you for free until you're able to have money to pay us. Or photographers will donate their time, which is like huge in representation in the case of our organization. People being able to see themselves reflected in the water, then they go and share it on that page, and that's kind of like that word of mouth marketing. So I would say community has been the backbone of scaling our org. People connecting me with funders, that word of mouth. It's been very helpful. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, sweet. So now I kind of want to switch and talk to all of you are business owners. All of you have had an idea that you've made possible. I want to talk a little bit about like what scaling means to you all. So I kind of want to throw the question back on you for a second. Maybe we'll start with you. What does scaling look and feel like in your organization, and where are you hoping to go?
So I'm a former elementary school teacher turned private tutor. I'm wearing all the hats, and my time is officially maxed out. And so the obvious route seems like I would perhaps hire some people under me, educators under me, and eventually run more of the business side of it and teach less. And then I also have ideas about wanting to mentor future tutors, help them go through the process I've gone through, and all of help them avoid some of the learning curves that I've had to take. So I'm kind of at a fork in the road and trying to understand better what each of those paths might look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like those breaking points where you're really kind of forced to look at which direction do I want to go, who do I need to get there. I'm curious, how are you currently documenting the processes that you do, your role?
That's part of the, I think like the big journey that I'm on right now is trying to take everything that I've just done myself that's in my head and put it on paper and put systems in place that can be tracked and followed by someone else. So I have contracts that I'm pretty much like an organization person, so I tend to like overthink things in the beforehand before I actually implement them. So that's helped a little bit, but I think right now I'm trying to figure out like exactly how much needs to happen before the leap is taken.
Yep. Yeah, it always kind of starts with that internal audit. So taking the time to really think about what your role is and what it currently holds and what you don't want to be doing anymore, what makes you want to like rip your hair out and takes that passion and buzz away. It always kind of starts with an audit, and how I do it, I'm trying to move this to quarterly, but annually I do a time audit. So I'll go and I'll look at like, where am I spending all my time? Where are the bottlenecks? What do I literally hate doing? That's like just draining me, and that people want you as the founder to be lively and to be able to like tell that you love what you're doing. So how can I do a do, delegate, delete process. So what do I love to do? What do I need to do? Where am I in that like zone of genius that no one else can really replicate in the same way that you do? And then delegate. So that's kind of the phase it sounds like you're at. You're needing to delegate, whether that be to new people and new bodies or to systems that can automate some of the things that make you want to pull your hair out. And then delete. So what do we not need to be doing? What am I just doing because I've been doing it? Like not like just out of habit. And so I really track myself of like, I'm on too many committees right now. Like I'm not able to have my head down and be writing grants, or I need to be networking more, because that's where those one-on-one conversations are the community love story piece of Black Surf. Like people really want to hear. And so doing that do, delegate, delete at least annually, but ideally more frequently than that really helps me like, all right, put things where they go. And I had to do a big, I have my job description that my board came up with, and then I have the things I actually do. And so when we did our first hire, it was like, what do I want to gift to someone else? And how can I do that in the job description? And so our first hire, her role was documenting processes. For the very beginning was just what am I telling you to do? How are you doing it? Write it down. And that was from there, now they get the opportunity to do, delegate, delete, and give that feedback back to you of all right, now I'm capped out in my role. We need an administrative assistant. That's been the theme for us. What is emerging as your thing? I personally love going to programs, which is kind of getting to be a bottleneck for our org. And so, how can we scale to a point where programs can happen without me there? That kind of stuff. What is scaling? Just to pose the question to some more folks, what does scaling look and mean like to you? So it could be, do you want to add more locations? Do you want to add more product offerings? Do you want to scale staff or operations? Finances, impact. Like for me, like I said, I don't feel like I created a sustainable org if it can't exist without me. And so that's a goal that I have for scaling of like, I don't want to spend all my time working. I don't think that's why I'm here. So how do we build systems that allow me that freedom and allow our staff that freedom? And then that's when, once you have that 1-for-1 first hire, now you have a process a little bit. And so that makes that going from 2 to 3 even easier, and then 3 to 4.